most common paper used for alcohol inks is Yupo paper. You can work on either side. Yupo paper does, however, tend to be quite expensive. So if you would prefer, you can work on a plastic coated card. This is one that I've found that is quite inexpensive. I don't know the name of the brand, but I'm sure if you go into any art store and ask for a plastic coated card, it will work fine. This one is shiny on the one side, and then it's got normal matte paper on the other side. And this card I found works as well. So it's got a slight plasticky coating, and you can work on either side. So all of those three pieces of paper will work. 2 inks are essential, and basically I'd suggest an eggplant. This is a Ranger brand. This I'm not sure if it's an overseas brand. It's called the Paper Mill. And this is slate. It's like a grey colour. And then in the lesson I also use silver alcohol ink, but this is not necessary. I ended up finding out that it didn't really work, and you've got to work with a lot of black for the silver to show up. So I do use it, but it definitely is not essential. You will need IP alcohol, and normally, so this is isopropyl alcohol, and normally it should be between, I think I've said 91 to 99% alcohol. I've put my alcohol into this syringe-tipped or needle-tipped bottle. It just makes it easier for me to control. You might also want to use a pipette. I've got a plastic pipette that you can use to suck the IP alcohol out of a bottle like this, and use it to put the IP alcohol onto your surface that you're using. You will need some drawing tools, and these artist pens, the Pitt artist pens, the shades of grey, are quite wonderful and can be used for all sorts of other purposes. So there they are, quite a nice range in value. And then in the lesson I also use a jelly roll. This is a Secura jelly roll, and I only use a number 10. I find that I destroy anything that's lower than 10. It's just too fine for me. In addition to that, I use a Posca pen, a white Posca pen, but this is also optional. You will need brushes to work some fine details or paint the ink into your artwork. And this is a number 1, and I'm not sure what this is, but it's about 1 centimeter thick. I also use a fine liner, and this particular one is quite beautiful. It's a brush one, and it's called Tombow Furunosuke, and it's, I think, identifying number is 150. I use a ruler in the class as well, or in the lesson at least, and you can use Q-tips for cleaning up areas or facial tissues, so those are useful to have around as well. I used one of these daisy palettes in the lesson, but I wouldn't recommend this because it's going to be very difficult for me to clean this. So what I would suggest is just using an old ceramic plate, like a dinner plate, and it will be much easier to clean. For this lesson, you will probably only need a straw. The straw is essential. I have this air blower that's very useful for blowing ink around, and then I have this heat gun. You can also use a hairdryer. This is a very low wattage, so it's not very strong. Essentially, you don't want to be blowing the alcohol ink all over the place. I've pulled out a few examples of work that I've done using alcohol inks. What I did is I created a background in alcohol ink and then drew with markers onto the surface. This spotted technique that you're seeing is where I put alcohol ink into a little spray bottle and then spray painted or sprayed over the surface. This is one where I worked with a very reduced palette, just working with grey alcohol ink or black alcohol ink. And then what I did is I drew with pencil, graphite pencil, and coloured black pencil into that portrait. This one started off, I hadn't done alcohol ink for a long period of time, and I've just recently returned to it, and I made a portrait and absolutely hated it. And the nice thing about alcohol ink is that I just poured IP alcohol over the whole lot, wiped it all down, and started again. The blue that you see is fountain pen ink. There's a bit of gouache over here at the top. But yeah, lovely technique because you can wipe everything down and start again. We are probably going to do something like this today. This is an experimental piece. I just wanted to try and get into it using many of the techniques that we are going to use today. I'm hoping that today's piece is going to work out a bit better than this. This is another little drawing that I did of a raven with the markers, the black colored pencil, and white gel pen. This is another piece I did last December, again using the same techniques with the alcohol ink in the background and then the various colored markers on the bird. So putting down the Yupo paper and a little bit of IP alcohol in the middle, and then I'm going to drop in the slate, the paper mill slate color, and this is the Ranger eggplant. And at first I'm just going to move this around. So I'm just moving it around that piece of paper. And then you can speed up that drying process with a hairdryer on a very low setting. And just watch that you don't get too close to that Yupo paper because it will warp the paper. And that has dried. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to dilute sections of this. So once you put alcohol onto your already dried alcohol ink, it starts to make these cells. And that's very typical of alcohol ink. And I don't really want anything that's too strong, so I'm just going to re-dilute that. When I look at this mark that has been made on the surface, I can almost see a bird already. I can make out like a beak shape and a bit of the head, and these almost look like wings. So for me, this is a beautiful start to an artwork. I've got the Faber-Castells, and I'm probably going to draw with the lightest one or the next one up, and then I'll move on to more aggressive drawing. So I'm starting off very light. I'm going to see if I can zoom in a bit. And it doesn't look like I'm doing much on the surface, but I can see some marks. So you're just going to have a little bit of faith right now. And it is incredibly faint, so I do apologize for that. You can start to see some marks here. And all I'm doing is I'm trying to familiarize myself with the shape of that bird. In my head, I don't really want it to be too small. So I'm just... But I'd also like to fit the whole bird into this artwork. So there is a little bit of planning that's going on. And if you do make some errors with the drawing, don't stress too much about it, because you can always wipe a lot of this away or work over it, one of the two. And I think I may have the proportions wrong already. So I'm just observing and looking at the shape of that bird and the angle that it's sitting at. And I was right, I had the head wrong. My goodness, I'm not sure what that bird's up to outside, but it's going absolutely crazy. Okay, I think that's accurate. So I'm going to commit a little bit more now with a slightly darker, or maybe a much darker. Looking at the eye area of that bird. Or I'm making marks with my hand. That's another thing that you need to watch out for. The upper paper picks up marks, so you need to be aware of what you're doing. If you do start making marks that you don't want, you can always put a little bit of IP alcohol onto a tissue and wipe some of it away. So I've just got a scrap bit of paper that I'm putting down, and I'm going to start working over this. So this bird has almost like a little collection of feathers next to the eye. You'll find that I work almost in a dotted fashion or a dash fashion when I draw. So I make these marks that aren't continuous, just so that I can later change and commit. So when I'm unsure, I almost do something like that. I'm already looking at this weird mark on top of the bird's head, and it almost looks like he's got a feather or something coming out, so that's a bit strange. I might need to come back and soften that. This is a lovely accident because it's already creating that feeling of this shoulder of this bird. And I do have all these strange marks underneath, but that will eventually be integrated into the drawing. So not worrying about that. So when I make these artworks, I almost try to make them look as accidental and natural as possible and not overworked. I don't want too much drawing. It might end up having a lot of drawing, but in my head, the intention is to keep minimal marks, minimal lines, not too much crazy shading, but to just make as few marks and keep it as spontaneous as possible. And the shape is not too bad. I'm quite happy with that. I think I've made the head a little bit too big, but again, I'm not too worried about that. I just checked my recording and I realized that I had cut off the bottom so you couldn't see what I was doing with the feet. But I've refocused everything, and hopefully this is going to be a lot easier for you to see what I'm doing. So I've got a palette here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little bit of the alcohol ink into the palette. And I'm going to start painting with the alcohol ink into this bird. So there's some really, really dark areas. So for example, that eye. When the alcohol ink is quite liquid, it does tend to move, but you can control it a little bit more with a brush. So this is the Ranger eggplant. And I'm just focusing on those really, really dark areas. This is a relatively small brush, but you can also use it on its side. When I'm painting with these alcohol inks, I'm also aware of what's going on underneath. So I'm always looking at that. So this is starting to dry. I can feel it's getting very tacky almost. And it won't move as much. So what I do is I just add a little bit of IP alcohol. And you'll see that once I put this down, it's going to move a lot more, and it will almost make these characteristic cells. And then you've just got to be careful. So you can't get too close to the edge because it's just going to move off. If you are worried about those cells moving, if you pick up a dryer and you blow in that area, it should stop it. If you're worried about the dryer being too strong, you can also use a straw. So what I'll do is I'll put some here. And you'll see the straw almost stops that movement immediately. But if you want less movement, then go for your drier ink. Oops, I used a little bit of the slate, but anyway, I'm just going to go with it and see what it does. I meant to actually use the eggplant, but it's fine. I think the mixture of the two should be quite interesting. A little bit more of that eggplant. This is the eggplant color. It's just a little bit more intense. And it's quite interesting. Once you've put fairly recent alcohol down, it doesn't really move too much. It almost confines itself to that spot. There's a very dark area under the beak. Just very aware that this could very quickly, I could lose control. What I'm going to do is, this little bit's still worrying me, so I think I'm just going to dilute it a bit more with the IP alcohol. And I'm going to quickly switch on my dryer and just move this. Oh, I went a little bit too close to the paper, and I think I may have burnt a little bit. Okay, no, it's not too bad. I'm just worried that I'm going to buckle that paper. I'm also constantly aware that I could be getting a little bit fiddly, and I don't really want that to happen. So I might pick up a bigger brush and just put bigger marks down. And just to reiterate, I'm definitely not an expert at this technique. But this is characteristic of what I do. I do tend to constantly experiment and play with various techniques. And sometimes I think that's what you've got to do. You've just got to jump in and get on with it. I'm always terrified that when I teach, I'm going to really mess up and make an absolutely awful artwork. But I think it's important for everyone to realize that art isn't about getting it perfect every time. It is often a learning experience. And I've just gone and done that again. I've put the slate down instead of the eggplant. But that's starting to look, in fact, that's starting to look almost like what the back should look like. I might drop a little drop. I think that could be the wrong mark for that spot, and that would definitely work better up there. This initial outline that I've put in, I'm also trying to soften that line so that it disappears in places, which could be quite fun. And I'm loving this blue that's appearing. So I'm not quite sure what is happening and how these two inks are reacting to one another, but there is this lovely blue that's emerging. We have something that's called load shedding in our country, and we've already had load shedding this morning, so they cut off our electricity for 2 hours at a time to allow our infrastructure to cope, and it's going off in an hour's time again. Like I said, we've already had a cut today at I think it was between 4 and 6 o'clock this morning, and it's now happening again. So the lights in my studio will go off, and I'll have to stop and carry on with this 2 hours later. But I think maybe that's a good thing. It's always good to have breaks when you are making art. I tend to be quite goal driven and I really want to get something done once I start. But yeah, maybe it's the universe's way of telling me to take breaks. Slow down. And just breathe. Every time I do one of these alcohol paintings, it just feels like it's a new experience. So it is a very, very interesting and exciting medium. So at the moment I'm trying to build up darker values at the bottom of this bird. And again, I think I'm going to pick up this brush that's a little bit bigger when it's gone very dry. So I'm going to put another little spot of alcohol in there. And maybe do a little bit of blowing with this dryer and see what it does. And although those aren't making much sense in terms of the drawing, or the reference, they are very interesting. There's lovely marks there. So I think I might actually just push a few more marks in here. And maybe it would be wise to paint some of these marks in. So all I'm doing is I've put IP alcohol into my, and there's very little ink left on this brush, but there's a tiny bit of ink. Just didn't want that to spread too much. And trying to simulate some of these long feathers. That sounds like someone's drilling in the background. I'm not winning today. It's either gardeners or people drilling. So as I'm working this bird up, I'm thinking two things. So it's about interesting mark making, but it's also trying to make equivalents. So I'm making round little marks that almost look like the feathers on that bird's back, and then I've made these long marks to imitate the long feathers. And that's quite interesting with that pink that's occurring on the edge. I think I'm going to stick on my dryer again. Stop that spread. And again, just making long marks in an attempt to imitate those feathers, those tail feathers. And I'm trying to soften these initial dark marks that I've made so that these marks become integrated into the drawing, or the painting at least. Okay, that is spreading too much. Okay, I made a bit of an oops there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little bit of the IP alcohol and just really soften that edge, and then just try and rub into it. Okay, that has sort of worked. So I think what I'm going to do now is I'm going to finish these feet and then start working into the bird with various pens. Looks like I've dropped a little hair there on the surface, and it has become a little bit grubby around those feet, so I think I need to go and wash my hands again. And then add a little bit of IP alcohol to this tissue and just try and clean around those feet. And I think I'm going to leave this for a little while and then come back to it. So I've had a bit of a break from this drawing, and I've just come back and I'm looking at it. Some of these marks are a little bit too repetitive for me, so I might drop some alcohol, IP alcohol into that area, but yeah, I'll just think about it. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to start drawing a little bit more detail into this. I don't really want to cover all these beautiful marks, so I'm just going to try and be mindful of that. Just trying to complete this drawing without overworking it, which is always a challenge. I was doing a little bit of reading, and I found out that a lot of people don't see ravens in a positive way, but in quite a few cultures around the world they're seen as very intelligent birds. Well, they are very intelligent birds, and they're almost seen as an equivalent for creativity or a symbol of creativity. So in that sense they are appropriate for us to be drawing. I think I'm just attracted by the wonderful glossy colors. I do like birds that are shiny. I'm particularly attracted to starlings because of their beautiful shiny quality. I am drawing beyond this edge of that bird, but that's creating quite an interesting line. I'm not sure if I'm going to leave it, but we'll just see what happens. If you had black alcohol inks, you could probably paint black alcohol ink into the areas that I'm working with the black pen right now, but I wanted to keep the materials fairly limited for this class so that if you don't have alcohol inks, you don't have to go and spend too much money. And this drawing is going to be about the suggestion of the feathers, not a drawing of every single feather. I almost feel this area needs to be lightened, but I'm a bit worried that if I work into it with IP alcohol, it might destroy that area. This bird's legs are very close together, so there's a second leg behind the one in the front. And there are these very strange, almost like square or rectangular little scales at the bottom of that leg. And there's a little third claw peeping out there. And then there's the back claw. I'm almost thinking that area needs to become a lot darker, but I might just work into it with purple alcohol ink rather than drawing into it with this black pen. And then there's a very strong diagonal coming in here, so there's that tail feather's very dark, and then there's a very strong diagonal. And then this undercarriage of the bird is quite dark. But I don't really want to lose a lot of that, so I might just paint into this area again. So I'm going to pick up the alcohol inks again and just paint into this area and try and darken it. And then I think I'm going to put a little bit more alcohol ink in at the bottom so that it covers some of the marks that I made. So I'll do that now. And this is really undiluted. I'm going to put a little bit of RP alcohol down there and just blow it. Just going to turn this around so it's easier for me to and just softening it. And I'm sorry about moving it so much, but it is difficult to work with it without actually shifting the. But I do think I'm going to paint a little bit into this area at the bottom. And actually, I'm not sure whether I like that. I think it's too strong and it's competing with the rest of the work. So what I might do is get a clean brush and then really, really soften this piece at the bottom and wipe a lot of it with a tissue. So I think I might just really polish a lot of that away. And keep it incredibly faded. And just suggestive. Just going to go in with a Q-tip. And now I'm a bit worried about this whole area looking a little bit fussy. So what I might do is I might stencil over this area, but I'm going to let it dry and then work into it. So what I'm going to do is take the hairdryer and just dry it thoroughly. And then draw into this section again with these feet. And then I think what I wanted is I wanted these feet to actually be quite grounded. So I'm picking up a Faber-Castell brush pen. And I'm just working that shadow in. And then I'm going to take a fine brush and I'm just going to work a little bit of alcohol into that to soften it. And then I'm still not happy about the surface here. You might not be able to see it on camera, but yeah, I'm finding it a little bit disturbing. So I think what I might do is just work a little bit of a pattern into the bottom area. But before I do that, I think I'm going to go with my gel pen and I'm going to start working in other areas of this bird. So in that, I'm just going to work a highlight for the eye. And this white is really, really lifting this drawing. So just adding a few highlights. And again, it's more of a suggestion of the feathers rather than drawing specific feathers. Just remember to keep cleaning that gel pen. And I'm almost in two minds about adding something onto the bottom there. I'm not quite sure if I should. But perhaps I should work with the silver. So it might be quite nice to actually have a silvery ground. I almost think there needs to be something here as well. So I think this section needs to be dark as well. But I think I'm going to turn this around and I'm going to put a little bit of alcohol down there. I think what this line is doing is it's making this bird stand out from its background, which is quite nice. Perhaps it needs one or two lines here as well. Just lovely to create that variety and mark. And I might do something at the bottom here. And across the top of that beak, I think. And there is this wonderful rectangular area that the bird is actually standing on, so I might introduce that as well. I really want to make this area darker. So I might just take one of these pens again and work into it. But try and keep it quite subtle if possible. So I want these feet to stand out without actually making crazy marks. And then what I might do is just work with a little bit of IP alcohol and soften those marks. And then I think on the other side of this platform that the bird is standing on, I think I'm going to put quite a definite mark in there as well. So I'm just going to make sure that all of this is dry and then work in there. So just picking up this ruler again. I'm not happy with these feet, so I think I need to work into them. Actually, I think this has become terribly overworked. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just remove all of that and work into it again. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some soft marks into this area. And I'm going to redraw all of that. The silver didn't really have much effect down here. So if you want to skip the silver in this lesson, you can. I just thought what I'd do is I'm going to maybe drip a little bit over here so you can sort of see what it looks like. The silver or any of the metallics need a very good shake before you use them. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drip a little bit here. So they do work best on, and I'm just going to move that, on quite dark pigments. So black or a very dark purple is very good. And I'm just going to blow that. And you will see that there's a slight shimmery, but it doesn't really make that much difference. So I'm going to leave that and maybe just work the feet up, and then I think this piece is going to be done. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to draw in those feet. And I might go with number 8 again. And my hand is a little bit sticky again, so I'm going to take another piece of paper and just use it on this piece so that I'm not putting down some grease or marks. And I think this is the lovely thing about alcohol inks, is that you can almost wipe it completely clean and start again. I'm just trying to see if this is in the shot, because I'd hate to be drawing and you can't see what I'm doing. And again, it's not too important if the accuracy isn't there. We're going more for the feeling of this feet rather than a complete, perfect rendition of those feet. And just thickening up that bottom line that the feet actually stand on, so it suggests that there's some weight in this bird. And then I think I'm just going to work some white marks into the feet. And at first going with the jelly roll, just because it's a little bit more delicate than that thick Posca pen I was using. And I could probably carry on fiddling with this artwork, but I think at this stage I'm going to call it complete.